Apologies from Damien, who had his last meeting of the Kingston NHS Trust, and I think everybody else is here with Rachel online. I'd like to welcome Steve. Welcome to your first meeting. Do join in and feel free to bring your perspective from other places. Of course, that's really important. Does anyone have any declarations of interest that aren't already registered or are particular for any items that are coming up in this? I couldn't see any. I'm not aware of any. No. Thank you. Minutes of the last meeting. Are people happy that this is an accurate record of the last meeting? Thank you. And so as I scroll quickly down, matters arising. I'm trying hard to find the matters arising. Would help if I had the right page. Yes, thank you. Page 11, thank you. Anyone, Sally, do you want to quickly take us through matters arising?
Yes, so the Nottinghamshire report, that's really waiting to these and more national recommendations coming through, and then we can respond to those. But obviously we talked about it at the July meeting. And then two complete items that we talked about: the service user patient dynamic that has been looked at by the involved team, but it is very much a live debate, and there wasn't an option that people came down with, so they're going to keep engaging with people on that. And the update on Martha's Rule, I mean, that's come in, I think, today for acute hospitals. And then again, we're waiting for national guidance, and then we'll bring that in further within Oxleas. Thank you.
Thank you. Abby.
So just to give a further update on Martha's Rule, Martha Mills would have been 18 today. Today is her birthday. And so Jane and I were at a meeting yesterday where Martha's Rule was discussed. So phase 1 has been completed with 143 acute trusts being involved. Phase 2 has started, and it says all acute trusts now implementing Martha's Rule. There hasn't been a lot of information on mental health providers and community trusts, and I did ask that in the meeting yesterday, but didn't get a response to that. So I plan to discuss it further with Dr. Adrian James, who's a National Medical Director for Psychiatry and Neurodiversity. I think it's been easier for the acute because some hospitals already had those kind of teams, so there's an easier process, but we will sort of keep an eye on what's happening for mental health and community provider trusts.
Yes. I was talking to a group about Martha's Law as well, who were involved in rolling it out, and there was absolutely nothing. They had no knowledge at all about mental health in communities. It was rather disappointing. But I suppose the question is, Abby and Jane, what should we be doing despite what the national centre is or isn't doing? Is there something here that we should be doing? Because it means, I think we've got to be careful, because it's not a photocopy for mental health, because that wouldn't work. What would work, and have we got a sense of that?
I think we're going to have to look into it, because if families or patients ask for second opinions or a review of their treatment, we do that at the moment. So we do that maybe on an ad hoc basis within Oxleas. So it depends on how it needs it. We want to approach it both for mental health and for community, because there'll be different issues. I think it's much easier in acute because it's about an escalation of someone deteriorating, and there are different nuances within providers like us that we would need to take account of. I think the most important thing which we are doing is listening to patients and to their families and carers, and listening to what their experience is, and they are the experts. So that's what we should be ensure that we're fostering, so that our staff are able to do that.
Just a quick question. What's the legal liability? So I presume it's a law. So there's a law there, and if a patient or service user said, I'm invoking that law, do we know what a liability is under that?
I believe the law only applies to physical acute health. And so, I think we could wash our hands of it. I don't suggest we should, but I think that side is mute. It seems to me that we ought to be thinking of how we develop a statement for ourselves about how we are responding to this, both for our staff and for our patients. We ought to be developing that statement over time. In spite of that, Martin.
So I just picking up on what Abby said and you've just said now, I think we need to think, if Martha's mum was in the room today, are we doing the right thing by our patients? And in mental health, it sounds like we probably are already. I think the bigger risk is probably in community and emergency services, which we are developing. So our emergency response services, our virtual wards, they're the areas where we need to think where there might be rapid deterioration of a patient's condition and family want that reviewed quickly. Are we able to respond in the way that we should? I'm not asking for a response to that. I think it's the question we should be asking.
So Jane and Ab, can we leave this with you and keep cognizant of whatever national guidelines are developed? That would be really helpful. Thank you very much. Susan.
It's just a quick comment on the service user stroke patient stroke client discussion. Although this hasn't come to a final conclusion, I'm really glad that we've engaged Involve, and they have been having a conversation with our community about it. I think it's an important thing to keep discussing and considering.
Thank you. And if you want me to guess, I think we'll end up with actually different answers and different bits of where we are, because I think some people see themselves as patients, some see themselves as clients, and some see themselves as service users. And that, my guess is that we'll end up with a bit of a fudge, but life is sometimes a fudge. Nina. Can we have a few more microphones in the future?
Thank you. Just on Martha's rule, I think a number of us will have been following it quite closely and keen and clearly conscious that it happened just down the road. At the heart of it is about restoring balance in the relationship between patient and doctor, or service user, carer and doctor. And so it just strikes me that however much good work we might be doing in this space, and I'm sure that we are, have we thought about how we address some of the inequalities that our service users and carers may face in using their voices, particularly those who we maybe aren't exposed to in the community? There are some who might be at an obvious disadvantage, so anything that we can do to incorporate thinking about them in the work that Jane and Abby are doing would be really appreciated.
Thank you. I think point well made. Okay, good. So Matters Arising has actually developed a new matter, but we will agree with the one. So slightly later than perhaps we planned. But thank you very much for coming. And Neil, can you introduce the presentation, which again, just to say it's really important for us that we've talked a lot already, but actually as we enter the formal business of the board, we really put the service user and care involvement really at the centre of what we're talking about. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So one of the conversations we've had about involvement is, are we being representative across the protected characteristics, or are we just drawing involvement from one area? One area of that is age. And we've had a lot of questions about whether there is a difference between recruiting people to be involved in adult services, older people's, or younger people's services. So I'm just really pleased that we've got the experts in the room from our younger people's services who'll talk about their experience of involvement and perhaps what we need to learn about being flexible in how we involve people. So Martin, I think you're going to start.
I think we're going to introduce ourselves.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name's Ollie. I'm a former service user at Bexley Cams, and currently I work in London as a degree apprentice.
Hi, everyone. I'm Madison, and I am the Children and Young People Participation Lead for the CYP Directorate.
Good morning. My name is Martin Deltrop. I'm a child psychotherapist based in Bexley. But my role in relation to this today is as the lead for participation for CAMS, which is something I've been doing for a number of years. And, I guess we're hearing a lot about the tensions in different roles, but we're all involved in CAMS, obviously in clinical roles, and finding the time to do the service developments that we've all been talking about has been very challenging. And although I think we've done over the years, we've done our best to involve young people in our projects, in our interviews and so on, we've really realized that we needed some dedicated assistance. And it was really, I think, transformational that we were able to employ to recruit and to employ Madison, and that's made a massive difference, really. And hopefully there'll be time to hear a little bit about some of the projects that we've been able to take on following that. But I think, as Neil said, I think we've really recognised the difference of involving young people and thinking about young people and how we can help them, how they can help us find a voice, which is different for a number of reasons, which we can think about. But so this sort of thinking specifically about how we can involve young people in thinking about service transformation and so on has been really crucial. But I think what's happened since Madison has had this full-time role, which has helped us, is we've seen a bit of a culture shift in that we don't see it as a kind of a bit of a sort of tiresome add-on. Oh, we better find somebody to join the discussion for the sake of it, but actually how crucial it has been in helping us to recruit the right people. On the interview panels, the really thoughtful contributions we get from the young people, and in thinking about our service developments as well, we need our young people and our carers to make the right decisions, and I think that's kind of been a bit of the theme of the conversation so far. So I think that's enough of me. I'd like to sort of pass back to Ollie, who's going to tell us a little bit about his journey from being a service user to a very active, hugely helpful participant in what we've been doing.
Thank you, Martin. So I'm mostly just going to talk today about sort of the ups and downs of my journey through CAMS as a service user, and sort of how that then transitioned into becoming more involved in participation, and sort of the stuff that we've been doing over the past couple of years. Just to give a bit of background over sort of how I came into CAMS. So a lot of my issues that I was having started from school. A lot of it started from my own sexuality. So I ended up coming out at school to one person at the age of 13. In 24 hours after that, everyone knew about my sexuality, which led to a lot of widespread bullying throughout the school. I was the only gay kid in school. So it was very much that there was no visibility. I was confused myself. I was, 13 years old, and all of this bullying as well. I sort of internalized all that hate, especially, being told that it was abnormal to be gay was a big thing. And school staff didn't, refute that either. So all of that sort of internalized and sort of transpired into me developing a lot of mental health issues. I attempted suicide for the first time in sort of the latter parts of 2020. So it's about October 2020. And I also had quite a bad self-harm addiction as well. And it was at this point that I fully reached rock bottom and decided to reach out for help. And I told my parents, briefly about what was going on. I'd been forced to come out to them previously because of the bullying, and the school forced me basically to come out to my parents. But that's another story. So I was referred to my parents called the GP, and the GP referred me to CAMS. I never had any involvement with the GP. I never spoke to a GP. I didn't know what CAMS was. School never told me that CAMS was an option, and the GP, obviously I never spoke to them. So the whole existence of CAMS was a complete unknown to me. All I thought there was the school pastoral team, who were useless. And so from that, sort of hearing about CAMS and hearing this was an option from my parents, they had a very sort of bad experience with CAMS, and the reputation that I then found online wasn't great either. So to be honest, like the level of hope that I had was very, very minimal coming into the service. I was seen for the first time in November of 2020. So at this point, we're in lockdown, so everything's online. I began the assessment process about 3 weeks after I joined the waitlist. My assessment process lasted 4 weeks, 4 meetings, 3 clinicians. 4 times I had to explain my story, which was difficult, very, very difficult for someone who, is on the brink already. It took, about 3 months for me to start treatment, which was also then all online. I was never told what I was diagnosed with. I was never told what conditions I had, which also would have been very helpful to know, because it's hard to not know, things like your sexuality and who you are at that age, but it's also hard to not know sort of if what you're being treated for is something that you've got, and not knowing that doesn't give you that sort of self knowledge that you are struggling with this. Going into the treatment, my therapist was excellent. He is probably the reason I'm still alive today. The way he was able to explain my options, allow me to guide my treatment, find out what worked for me. And he gave me the time and space to really talk, find out, what was going on, the deeper meaning behind these things, and give more compassion to the parts of myself that I was struggling with, and the hate that I had, internalized from school. As with any treatment, it was up and down. I did attempt suicide again halfway through my treatment. And the way he reacted to this was probably one of the reasons that I didn't attempt suicide again. He managed it really well with my parents. I really expected him to have such a big reaction to it, because we'd been doing so much work, and I've been in therapy for about 8 months at this point. But he was so calm and showed so much compassion to it, and it was a sort of level of no judgment that I had never received before, with my parents being very much fixers and very much wanting to put things in place and needing things to be fixed quickly. There is a level of judgment that comes with that, and he didn't give me that, which was great, and it was really helpful. Another thing that I was really skeptical of at the start was opening up. I mean, I'd been, told that being gay was abnormal and that I should, just hide myself, and that everything about that was wrong. The one thing that stopped me from, not opening up was rainbow lanyards. My therapist came into the first session with a rainbow lanyard, and immediately I felt safe. So it's great to see these on the table today. But I still feel that at work when I'm in my workplace and I see people with rainbow lanyards, and it makes it feel okay to be yourself, to have that conversation. So I'd urge everyone on this board today to really pick those up. Coming into my discharge, I was weaned off sessions, which was amazing, and how it should be done. I was given a discharge letter, which was highly personal, and clearly it took my therapist a lot of time to write that. Which was really helpful. And he also gave me a timeline, because, to be honest, a lot of the journey is still a blur, and a lot of it I really don't remember. So that was really helpful, and I still go back to that when I'm struggling. So I would really urge that to be a priority when people are leaving the service. Coming into participation, so I had joined a couple of events just before I left CAMS, and it was more like feedback events, where there was definitely one with like quite a big group of people, and it was very few and far between. I mean, we had about 4 staff members who were sort of running and in communication with myself. There was a group set up that they were trying to really push, but it was very much not unusual for it just to be myself in those groups, given feedback and some sort of input there. There's a couple of interview panels that floated around, but these clinicians didn't have the time, they didn't have the space to do so, and these sorts of things would often get cancelled because they had different commitments, and I understood that. And then sort of, I think it was about November last year, Madison came in, and the amount that I've been able to get involved in since then has been kind of insane, to be honest. Like having 2 years where I was, you know, just sort of here and there, I'd do things to, you know, the group being set up and having so much input into the interview panels. And, you know, we're working on social media posts, newsletters, all of these sorts of things that I never thought was going to be possible because it was never really given as a priority. I did want to mention something actually that we talked about 2 years ago was Oxcare. We had someone come into the group at the time and present about Oxcare, and it was going to be this revolutionary platform that had digital passports for young people. It was going to be accessible for people on the waiting list, to have sort of a detailed account of what they were going through. So when they then came into treatment, you know, the clinician had all of that information. They didn't have to keep explaining it, which was something that was really important to me after my assessment period. I understand that's now been paused, which is really disappointing and really unfortunate, but I'm really hoping that can get on the move, because it has so many benefits for the young person and for the service as a whole. The other thing I wanted to talk about was interview panels. So I've been on a couple over the past year, which has been really positive. And I think it's really important that we, as young people with service experience, are on the interview panels. We can give a perspective, I think, that a lot of, you know, clinicians can't. We know sort of what we would need from treatment. We've been through treatment. We know what was helpful, what wasn't helpful. And I think our voices there are really important. You know, we don't do it for the money. We don't come, you know, for a paycheck. We come because it's important to us that people that come after us in the service are getting a better service than we did. Even though, you know, mine was highly positive, there were always places to improve on that front. And, you know, it is really important that we're heard, because there have been times where we haven't been heard and we have felt pushed aside. So we think it is really important that young people are on those interview panels, are heard, you know, their views are taken into consideration. So I am really excited for participation going forward. It feels like we can sort of bring anything that we feel would be helpful to Madison and to the group, and it fully be investigated and taken forward, which is really exciting, and I'm really looking forward to what happens next. I did just have a question for the board, if I may. So my question surrounds a story that I heard from a health visitor in the NHS who specialised in mental health under Oxleas. They had a 17-and-a-half-year-old client who was struggling with mental health issues and was told by professionals, namely the GP, that she wouldn't be permitted to join the CAMHS waiting list because she was too old and wouldn't get into the service in time, but also couldn't join the adults list because she was 18. So effectively, she was denied treatment. And, you know, as a health visitor, these are very vulnerable people who have mental health issues and have children. I've since found out that it was incorrect information that she was given. So my question is, how are you as a board making sure that myths like this are squashed out within NHS staff, within the wider community? Because it's myths like these that are causing people, one, not to receive help when they need it most, and two, continuing the reputation that CAMHS just won't help. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ollie. Thank you very much for that. That was very important and really tied into what we've already been talking about the voice being at the centre. Does somebody want to answer the specific question that Ollie has placed for us? Ian, you look like your hand was inching towards the microphone.
Everybody's looking at me, Ollie. Well, first of all, Ollie, thank you for sharing your story. I mean, it's you know, it sounds like you've been through a lot, and yeah, I really appreciate you sharing it with us, because it does. One of the reasons why we have people like you coming along is to kind of help us to reconnect with our purpose, really, as an organisation. So thank you. I mean, it's a really good question, and I'll try to give you a straight answer. But I think it is complex. It's really, there are always kind of myths about particularly around access to services. I think we're a growing organisation. We're quite a large organisation. Sometimes internally we're not always particularly great at being aligned at every level in terms of describing what we do and who we're there for. So I think there's a responsibility for everybody that works in Oxleas. Certainly, for me personally, I'm involved in quite a lot of the kind of local partnership meetings, and one of the things I'm really trying to do is to kind of stress the importance of CYP mental health within that, and to kind of explode myths. But I think, notwithstanding what you were saying, Martin, people are busy. There's also about how we help the teams themselves to feel part of that wider system and have those conversations. So some of it is about kind of information, and some of it is just about taking the time to have those conversations. But I think it's a really good point, because it could make a massive difference, and we need to be timely in helping people to access things. So yeah, really important.
And to me, it almost seems to be about mindset, if I may, that in actual fact, that person who gave that piece of advice should either have known that it shouldn't be, the NHS shouldn't be having that sort of barrier. And actually, if it does, they should be advocating about it. And that seems to be, and I think one of the roles that we have in Oxleas as well is that advocating role as well. So, Iffy.
Thanks. So first thing to say, Ollie, thank you so much for that. As I was listening to you, it again reminded me why I came into this profession and why I do this every day. And I think it speaks to our earlier discussion about anxieties and about provision, because ultimately that's what it's about. It's good that we got you in the room because you've had a positive experience, but I'm also mindful that there are lots of people out there who have not had a positive experience. I'm mindful that whatever we do or whatever other boards across the country do may disadvantage some people, and I think that's the tension. That's the thing we've got to hold. Just to add a bit of context, so the question you've asked is a good one. Ian has responded to it, but I think that more broadly across the NHS, there's a lot more we need to be doing. So certainly in London, we're really keen to support schools. So mental health support in schools is critical. We think across Southeast London, we've got 50% coverage. By 2030 or 2029, we need to have 100%. And there's a question about the quality of that, so that someone like yourself, when you talk to our pastoral care team, etc., they need to have people they can turn to who can support young people. I think there's also some work that we want to do, which is about what's available to young people digitally. Are there either apps or places that young people can go to? And so organizations such as ours should be able to put into that port how you access, so it's not about, can I or can I not? You just need to know that you can. And I think that as the NHS begins to develop neighborhood health, that there is going to be an opportunity for us to interact more with GPs, with the wider neighborhood, to then make sure that people have a clear understanding of our provisions and what may be available to them in the neighborhood, perhaps not necessarily within Oxleas, but that will make sure we support residents, so to speak. But again, I cannot thank you enough. This is the thing that makes me wake up every morning, springing my feet, let's go do this. Thanks.
Sorry, can I just, in terms of timing for this, I think Madison had a few words potentially, or whether people would like to argue things now.
People are lined up, but can Madison, can you say, and then let's have all the questions and comments at the end. I think we're answering a specific question then. Let's Madison.
Yeah, I'll keep it short and sweet because I know you've got a very long agenda. But I just wanted to say that obviously since I've come in and I've met young people like Ollie, they have offered such rich feedback around the CAMS service. And some of it, I'm sure, is things that the CAMS teams are already aware of in terms of like how long people are waiting for treatment and currently there isn't as much offered to young people and families whilst they're waiting, and that can be a really difficult time, and we see a lot of young people escalating as they're waiting because things can spiral. But it's been really exciting that we've been able to have a lot of conversations and really hear from young people and parents and carers around what would they have needed whilst waiting, and that there is a space that I can take that feedback and it's really being heard. And I think that's the most important. And as Ollie said, they can bring anything to me and I will do my best to raise their voices, because it is so important. Because as you know, all of us sitting around the room, I think we all have, you know, perceptions on the experience that we think people have, but we actually really need to hear from them what that experience is really like and really take that on board. So yeah, I think I just want to say thank you to Ollie again coming to speak, because it's a really big deal coming to sit in a room with a lot of people that you've never met before, and being so open about your journey. And I think that that's been really important to hear, so thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Madison, as well, for making this happen and helping. It's really important to have that glue. Rachel is first, and then Sophie.
Hello, everyone. It's really great to meet you, Ollie, Madison, and just had a few questions, really. So I want to start off, first of all, with you, Ollie. So in terms of some of the things that you talked about there, it was really brilliant to hear you talk about what's working really well. But you also mentioned some things that didn't work so well, and that's exactly why it's brilliant to have you coming and talking to us. So you talked about, I think, about the waits that you encountered. You also talked about some of the facts that you weren't given the diagnosis straight away, and some things that we can be learning about for the future. And so I suppose, as well as thanking you for being so open with us, I just wonder if you feel as though that kind of feedback loop happens well, because what we know is that if we're encouraging people to speak up, that's fantastic. But if they speak up and then tell us about things that could do with maybe improving, and they don't see those things improving, then maybe they won't bother to do that next time. So I don't know if that's a question for you really, Ollie or Madison, but just to really kind of understand how we make sure, as we're encouraging more patient voice, how we make sure that that feedback loop happens. So that was one of my questions. And then another question was around how we make sure that there are kind of age appropriate tools in terms of kind of what we use, because we've got quite a wide age range of people who access our CAM services. I was quite surprised at how young it goes, and obviously those ways of communicating need to be so different according to different age ranges. So how do we get that right was an interesting question for me. And also we've been thinking about health inequalities a lot as a board. So do we know if we're getting feedback from a representative range of people, whether that's to do with people's sexuality and then their gender, or whether it's to do their ethnicity, or whatever that might be, just to understand, are we hearing from all the people that we need to hear from? But thank you so much, Ollie, for your openness and your honesty. It makes such a difference to us all. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll answer question one. I don't know if you guys want to answer question two or three. But in terms of feedback, I do think that it was very difficult at the start of, when I left CAMS and participation wasn't as important, well, not important, but like prioritized as it is now. It was really hard to see that feedback, and it was really hard. It did feel like when I was coming to the groups, we were sort of saying the same things, and not much was happening. And I don't blame anyone for that, but it was difficult to see that change. Now it's a lot better. I mean, we're talking about things and then we're seeing, the results next time. We talked about social media and now we're reviewing social media posts. We talked about the fact that there's no sort of like on when people join CAMS, they don't know what they're coming into. Is in terms of the building, we're now filming the buildings and putting those on people's assessment letters. So we are seeing that change because it's becoming more prioritized, which I think has been really great, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes next.
Brilliant.
And can I just add that it's a work in progress and there are huge tensions, obviously around what young people might be recommending and suggesting, and the system which struggles with change. We're hearing from young people they really like care coordinators, they want care coordinators. The system is moving away from care coordination for various reasons. So there are always tensions, and I think it's a work in progress getting the voice heard, and people in intermediate roles having to scream and shout as well, and do a lot of work to try and get that moving. I think in relation to our coverage, no, we're not covering as widely as we would like in terms of the age range of the participants. It needs a lot of resourcing to hear the voices of everybody. We're also part of CYP, and so there will lots of young people with various conditions who are, not able to have their voices heard, and that needs lots more work. So we're beginning something, I think, or we're sort of in early stages, but I think we're very clear that we're not reaching the whole community and the different groups, and that's the challenge, I think, going forward to try and make that happen.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on the point of, are we reaching kind of all of the different kind of young people that are out there? And I think we've definitely got a lot better working with service users that have maybe just left CAMS or some of our specialist services. But I think and it's come up in some of the work that I've done with Ollie and other young people, is and myths comes up a lot in a lot of conversations, especially with parents and carers as well as young people, that actually I think we need to look outside of our current service users and hear from the communities themselves around what is the perception and what do they believe about CAMS, and how do we break down some of those barriers to increase the access into our services, especially from certain communities. And that's definitely an area that Martin and I have been discussing, and how do we kind of start those conversations with young people that maybe do really need help and support, but there is this perception around, oh, you're going to wait 2 years for CAMS, so don't bother. And I think it's important that we have those open conversations and really hear from, the community around how can we take that internally and really kind of work on that. So that's definitely a focus for me over the next kind of 6 months, is to work on access and the barriers that are in place.
Complicated, Mike. Yeah, so thank you so much. That was incredible to hear your story, and as others have said, that just really gave me that perspective. I wanted to just make a comment and ask a question. So what really hammered home to me was that this is not an add-on, as you say. This is absolutely integral to what we do. And what you said about rainbow lanyards particularly struck me. How would we have come up with that? How would we have known that had you not told us? And other things as well, for example, young people being part of interview panels. So going back to the part about it not being an add-on, how can we make this an essential part of what staff know and understands to be good service provision? So how do we know that all our CAMS staff understand the importance of listening to young people and that participation? And where do you think we are on that journey? It did strike me that if right from the start at your interview you have a young person sitting on that interview panel, that really makes the first point. But is it part of induction for new staff? Where are we on that journey?
We're working on it. I don't know. We're working on it, and part of Madison's remit is to help us build a structure as well, across the services, so that there's a lead per borough, and participation is disseminated into teams, so that each team has a champion. So there's a structure that we're working on to ensure that the voice is represented across. It does require resources, it does require time, and it does require a sense that this is a priority. And I think that's been the argument we've been pushing, or trying to push. This is a priority, this is not an add-on. And it's a challenge, obviously, because there are lots of other priorities too. So it's, as I was saying before, there's a tension around that. But I think, as I was saying in the interest, there has been a culture shift, I think, that is now recognised more widely that we can't do without the voice of the young people, the ex-service users.
Hi, Ollie. I'm Nina. I found what you shared with us incredibly powerful and very grateful that you did. I have a 13-year-old and one who's not far behind, and I know what a cruel environment school can be for anyone who's got any differences. My concern, and I guess my question, and forgive me if I'm stepping out of the kind of boundaries of this discussion, my concern is that we seem to wait until the child reaches crisis point. And then it becomes a much more serious issue to address. And invariably, the impact on the child is much graver than if we had intervened sooner. How do we begin to address that, understanding that it sits outside the scope of the point at which Oxleas normally gets involved? Because it feels wrong to wait until you need, which is the pathway that I've been through, you need to have that urgent GP appointment, and then you get the urgent CAMS referral, and then. How do we intervene before that point?
Yeah, so I feel like in my experience, there was so many signs. There was so many times I asked for help at school. There were, I went to the pastoral leads, I went to the school counsellor. The school counsellor told me to hug myself, and that would make me feel better. It wasn't like surprising, I don't think, like looking back where I ended up. And I think, it was a lack of understanding for me of what support was out there beyond school. We never had any presentations or anything about CAMS, Oxleas, anything outside of the school pastoral team. And obviously I tried the school pastoral team with no luck. So it's school is cruel, and teachers don't understand. And I think, there's so much work that needs to be done, with CAMS getting the name out there to school kids, so that school kids know that there is, options beyond school, but also staff need to be trained on mental health, on, things like as simple as bullying. Everyone talks about how anti-bullying campaigns and all of this. If you go into certain schools, teachers don't know how to deal with it, and they will pinpoint certain things. I'll quickly just talk about. So I was called a slur in while we were like at lunch or something, and I had had enough, quite frankly. And I pushed the child back and I kicked him, and that's what the teacher saw. And then even despite describing the situation to the teacher, they still decided to punish me instead of the child. And it's just that lack of understanding. They didn't understand what the slur meant. They didn't understand why that was damaging, and why I reacted in the way I did. So I think it does start at that sort of grassroots level of teachers and pastoral teams, but also the awareness that CAMS has in the community as well.
Hi, I'm Sally. I'm the Trust Secretary and Director of Corporate Affairs. And it's really interesting to hear your comments, but also what the board's saying. And I really think that the neighbourhood approach actually will enable some of these discussions, and it be such a less of a distance, I suppose, from our services into the communities. And if we can get that right, both for the community engagement and the raising awareness of kind of the options that are open to people, I think that's really positive. And it's good, I think, that we've got a background in our involved network. So, we talked about the job interviews. We have our involved network, which certainly for wider services across Oxleas as well, that is a pool of people that will get involved in the interview process. So we've got the good structures in place, and if we can extend those through our work within the neighbourhoods, I think it is a really positive opportunity.
So firstly, thank you, Ollie, for I think it was me first, yeah. So thank you, Ollie, firstly, and Madison, and for coming along and speaking to us. I was just wanting to reflect on the piece that you were the previous piece about intervention earlier on, and I do think some of the networks that we've got within South London Listens and the Be Well hubs and how we can spread that to children. I think it was a really pertinent point that you made, Madison, around reaching out to the communities because they themselves are not coming forward because of a series of myths, and some of those could be around racism and all of those other factors. So I think that openness and also really linking into the network that we've got around schools, because there have been examples where the pastoral care has been, I would say, better than what you experienced, Ollie, in certain other schools, and how we feed into that network to allow young people to have a range of different options and a range of different voices, and also a set of community. Because what really struck me was the isolation that you had of I am the only one, which clearly cannot have been the case. But it may have been people were very nervous about being as open, perhaps, as you were, and I have no doubt that you probably regretted that, given the reaction that you had at certain times, and then being forced to repeatedly out yourself in a way that you weren't prepared for. So I think opening some of those routes where perhaps we can't do it as an organisation, but absolutely plugging into the networks that would be able to do that, that are more embedded in the community, is going to be really key.
Thank you, Ollie, for coming here today and sharing your story. I had a question about how we have kept you engaged, or how you think we can keep people engaged when we cannot deliver on some of the feedback we're given. You mentioned some of the tensions around care coordinators. You've mentioned waiting lists where we all recognize a problem but don't necessarily have the means to fix that in a way that we know needs to be done. So how do we make people feel that the service still cares, still listening, and wants to improve when we can't act on the feedback immediately or in a sort of time appropriate way?
Yeah, I mean, I've stayed engaged for the last 3 years, so it's like, I think the biggest thing is that everything that we bring and everything that we sort of say is, I think the biggest thing is that's followed up. It's coming from the place of a young person to someone who is in the organisation. When I was joining and we were sort of talking about this, we were going around in circles. It didn't feel like it was being followed up because there was no sort of space for it. So I think, yeah, it's difficult because we understand as young people that you can't change everything. We can't change everything. There's so much that people bring that we're like, it's such a big problem and issue. So we also have that understanding that we can't just say we want to fix waiting lists and overnight it's fixed. But the biggest thing for me is that we feel listened to and we feel heard. I brought something to Madison a couple of months ago about working with an external organisation, and we spoke about it quite a few times, and Madison followed it up, and unfortunately it didn't lead to sort of what we wanted, but it was the fact that was then followed up and that avenue was taken, and it made my voice feel heard and important in the work that we're doing. So I think, yeah, making sure that we feel like we can contribute and do contribute in meaningful ways.
Can I just add very briefly? But I think what's really helpful is to maintain personal relationships with the young people, that have been through our service. And I think that's been really wonderful, having Madison, who's been able to phone people up, make relationships with people, come along, try it out, see how it goes. It's very different than sending out a mail shot. We've got an event on the 27th of March. Nobody pitches up at all. It needs that. And that's, that's the enjoyment as well of sort of maintaining the relationships. But it's, that's the resourcing as well, that we need the time to keep contact with people once they've been discharged. So I guess that's also key, I think.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think one of the take-home messages that actually come out from the last series of questions, actually one of the roles of Oxleas in this is not necessarily to do everything, but to help curate the neighbourhood, the environment, the things. And so we will not be running the pastoral teams in schools ever, but actually we maybe need to help them do a better job in your case, and learn from them as well. So I think there is something very, very key in us. We can't do everything, but we can help create the ecosystem that actually supports things in partnership with our partners. So Ollie, thank you very much. Madison, Martha, thank you very much indeed. Sorry for having mistaken you for somebody else when you came in. Do apologise for that. And thank you very much. We'll carry on with our main meeting, but as I said, you're welcome to stay, but you may think you have other things that you would like to do other than sitting on this meeting. That's also absolutely understandable. So thank you. What I was going to suggest that we did was, should we do the board assurance framework and then we will have coffee? So the board assurance framework and then coffee as the carrot at the end of the board assurance framework, if you can imagine that.
Right, that's my cue. Not a great deal to say about the board assurance framework. As you see from my paper, we still have 10 risks, 4 which are significant, 3 high, and the rest are moderate risks. Perhaps a couple of things that I kind of want to mention. If you look at the significant risks, financial sustainability, bed management are really crucial for much of what we're going to be discussing today. Cyber is stuff that we're going to keep working on, and the PFI, we're being hopeful that we'll be able to come out of those, because financially that would also help. When I look at the 3 high risks, I thought I just needed to mention the vacancies and staffing pressures, because that may need further discussion in the People Committee, particularly in the light of what will come to in part 2 of the board about living within our means. And then, of course, we have to work as hard as ever to reduce violence, aggression, and abuse that our staff experience. That's one of the things that really excites me about the outcomes framework. That it's not just about money or performance, it's also about the experience of our staff and the experience of people who use our services. So that's all I wanted to say about the BAF. Not a great deal of review for today, but I'm hopeful that when we next come to a big review that we'll hold twice a year, that there will be an update from board committees, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Iffy. Questions or comments to Iffy? Okay, Nina.
Just because while we're on it, the question was asked of People Committee at our end of July meeting around whether we wanted to retain risk 1471 discrimination at work, given that this seems to be an issue that many trusts are battling with. We had what I thought was a good discussion and concluded that we will never be comfortable about accepting some of the realities of what our staff have to deal with, and that we would be very uncomfortable about not acknowledging it as a risk that we continue to be able to take mitigating actions to address. And that was where we ended up.
Thank you. Thank you. That's helpful. And I think, again, aligned with our values. Okay, Martin.
Thanks. And I recognise the discussion we had that Nina described, but you can extrapolate that to lots of this, can't you? I don't want to make light of it, but, I was taught at maths that parallel lines will never meet. And we've got a set of parallel lines on each of these graphs, haven't we? And one of the reasons we've got that they're not converging is because maybe the actions that we're taking aren't the right ones. Maybe it's because our level of risk acceptance is our anticipation is that we'll be able to get there when we'll never get there. And therefore we need to raise or lower our expectations and raise our targets of acceptable risk. And the third reason is acknowledging that we'll never get to some of these, but we want to show whoever the audience is, be it our staff, our patients, our regulators, whoever, that we take this seriously and we are dealing with it. But I do think over time, on some of these, it would be good to see the risks converging, not just running against a parallel line with the target.
Thank you. I think that's right. And there's some things that are issues. And if we take cyber as an example, cyber's not going away in the near future. There is always going to be a high risk about cyber, and we'll never mitigate that away. However, we need to demonstrate to ourselves and have it on our agenda. But other things we probably maybe need to be thinking more about. Actually, this is one where we have a target to shift it, and we have a target to shift it in 6 months or whatever. Others, we maybe just need to be mature and say we're not going to shift, we're going to maintain, and we have to tolerate it or whatever. Thank you. Suzanne.
So it goes back to Ify's comment that we're seeing the BAF in its current form. And I think we probably all feel that it needs completely rethinking. You know, if the BAF is intended to enable us to monitor and deal with our most significant risks, this current BAF does not reflect the significant strategic risks that we face as an organisation. And so I'm not sure what you're anticipating is going to come back, because I think that the current format is that risks have come up from committees and they tend to be focused on the near rather than the far. And I'm not suggesting that these are not strategic risks. They are, but as a whole, the BAF does not reflect the strategic risks as an organisation that we're taking. And I'm wondering whether we can perhaps pick that up a little bit this afternoon in the discussion about the challenges that the 10-year plan and associated issues are offering us, and a future BAF will reflect a more strategic focus.
Thank you. Come in.
Thanks. Actually, it was quite a similar point to Suzanne's, actually. I think we are now facing a significantly different context that we're operating within. And I do feel as though in the next few months it would be worth us taking a good step back and looking afresh at the BAF in the context of all of the things that are changing and all of the challenges that we have. Many of the BAF risks, I'm sure, will continue to be ones that we would want to include, but I feel as though we need to do that kind of bottom up and top down look at it afresh, just to be reassured that those are the right risks for us. And I also think that we've probably gone down the question of issues and risks a few times, and we need to wrestle that one to the ground. I think I suspect that we will be in the position that we want to keep issues on the BAF, but nevertheless I think they should be marked as such, and we should be thinking about them in that context. So to me, this feels like a good moment for a bit of a BAF refresh.
I agree with everything that's been said, and I think maybe one of the frameworks we look at is that I think BAF is seen as in year, and we now have this 10-year plan, we have longer term. So I think that may be some way of reframing the framework. Some things are in year, but some things are much longer term, and that might be a way of looking at it.
Thank you. So we've got several things. So we've got bottom up, top down, we've got issues and risks, we've got short term and long term, and we might need to be thinking about segmenting that one, and perhaps especially the top down ones, refreshing and checking that with the changed environment that we're now in, that we're reflecting on that. Does that seem as a reasonable place for us to be? Thank you. Okay, it's 11:30, so I'm going to suggest that we invigorate ourselves with coffee ready for the second half of part one. Those who are watching online, we'll turn off the microphones now, but we'll turn them back on again is 10 minutes good for people? So we'll meet at 20 minutes too, if that's okay. Thank you very much. Ollie raised a question about the lanyards, and these have been produced by our LGBTQ plus network, and they're an updated version. So there was a previous version, but they have the additional logo now, which is the latest logo. And I must admit, I should know more, but I'm not an expert in it. But it's the one that they would wish us to wear if and only if you feel like comfortable in doing it and want to demonstrate, as Ollie said, that alliance with people, or that openness to some of our colleagues. Okay, let's start. Tell better than I can.
Well, it's just to expand on that point. I'm the exec lead for the LGBTQ plus network. I think the way that Oxleas have introduced the lanyard is possibly different from other organisations, and it's that point, Andrew, that we want people to kind of consciously wear it, and it is to kind of signal to others, whether they are users of our services or colleagues, that we are kind of allied with them. So yeah, it was just to kind of expand on that point, really.
Thank you. Okay, now the chair's report, and I'll pick up with this one. Sally and I were unfortunately on slightly different timetables this last couple of weeks because of the summer and holidays, so I wasn't able to add. Well, I did add, but not in time to the report. So I'm afraid my additional bits I normally write are going to be verbal. I'll leave the report, if you like, as stands. I'll just reflect that at our last meeting, during our last meeting, was when the 10-year plan was actually published. I think the other thing that also came out quickly soon after that was Penny Dash's review of the quality, the regulation of quality. And I think what's interesting about that, apart from calls for simplification, calls for joining things up, was the sense that we needed more emphasis on effectiveness, on patient and user experience, on accessibility, on equity, and on efficiency, rather than perhaps as much of an emphasis on patient safety as previously, and that there should be a bit of a rebalancing between those things. So I think that's an interesting thing for us, and the idea that we should look at things in the joined up way. So the sense at the moment where a regulator can tell a trust that it has to, I don't know, increase the number of staff doing this one without any view of the bigger picture of the finances or balancing out needs between different areas. And so I think that again has got to be welcomed. The other show in town that's happened over the summer has been the NOF, and that's going to be mentioned by Iffy later on. So I won't say anything except to say that I think, we are clearly it is really important for us to be cognizant of the NOF, because that is how we are going to be measured. And as we'll touch on later, that is important. It's also important for us to make sure that we are clear about what else we want to do, because we have to do what we have to do, what we're commissioned to do, but we also have to think about our strategy. And if there's stuff that we want to do in addition to the NOF, we have to also think about that one. So I don't think we want to get we need to be focused on it, but not exclusively focused on it, would be my suggestion. I think that the other thing that's coming out of both the 10-year plan and about the NOF and anything else is that sense of earned autonomy, that providers should have earned autonomy, that they should be set objectives, and then if you are high performing, you will be left to get on with it, to carry on performing highly. I have to admit, as sort of Sally hinted at earlier on, it doesn't at the moment particularly feel like that. And it doesn't feel as though there's a deluge, a blizzard of stuff that we are being sent to confirm, to check, and to do everything else. So at the moment, it doesn't seem like that. It doesn't feel like that in there. I think, if I'm going to be absolutely honest, that we are not the only people going through massive change at the moment. NHS England, DHSC, ICBs are all going through massive change, and people are making it up, frankly, as they go along to some extent, because that's what they've got to do, and therefore, as a result, there's stuff that's happening at pace, and that stuff that's happening at pace is therefore coming as a blizzard and is perhaps not as well thought through as it would be conventionally done. And I think that hopefully that's just where we are at the moment, and that we will move through that. I think the other thing that we need to keep our eyes on, and again, we don't have a lot of information about this at the moment, but is the integrated health organisations, the IHOs, if you like, the super trusts or what super foundation trusts that will be responsible for care in their region. And certainly there is a certain amount of jockeying going around in the NHS around one or two trusts who are seeing themselves as potential IHOs. We don't yet know what it means. We don't yet know what responsibilities it covers, and we don't yet know what resource will be given to do this. And so so at the moment there's a lot of jockeying without quite knowing what the racetrack is. But we'll get there in the end. But we will need to think about what our reaction is. I think it's quite clear that the other end of our ICB, it's quite likely that Guy's and St Thomas's will want to be an IHO. I think that's fairly clear. I don't think that's a state secret. And therefore, what happens at our end of the patch, etc. So I think that's something we're going to have to keep an eye on. The other thing I mentioned, and it's mentioned in the report, but I also want to bring it out a bit, is that I've done lots of visits, actually. It's been a really fantastic couple of months for meeting our services, but two that I just want to pull out, some of which I will be talking about later, is Vanessa, the chief executive of South West London St George's, took me around their Springfield new build, and I was privileged to be taken around that one. And I also went around the Greenwich Mental Health Hub with Jane Bailey, who's the chair of SLAM. And I don't particularly, they were really important talks, excuse me, and I think Springfield as well in particular is something which is a really interesting how they have used the built environment there, not only to make a therapeutic environment, but also to build a community, or to start to build a community of people around their mental health trusts. And so I think it's a really interesting development there. But actually for me, in my chair role, what I'm trying to do here is work closely with my other two co-chairs to develop close working across it, to develop learning between them. We already work closely together in South London Partnerships. The exec team already work very closely with their counterparts across the other two trusts. And I think there's a real opportunity there for us to learn from each other, to develop common standards, common frameworks. And what I was also interested in is thinking about outcomes. At the moment, I think one of the problems that we have in mental health more than physical health, so in the mental health half of what we do, is that if SLAM are doing something different from us, or South West London and St George's are doing something different from us, we find it very difficult to say whose model we should adopt, who has the best model, because we don't agree actually on the outcomes that we are going to use to determine what is best. And of course, one size doesn't fit all. It's not that everybody needs to be the same everywhere, but I do think that there's some questions that we need to ask about actually across the three of us. Can we sometimes determine best practice and then work out how to share that best practice between us? And since we've got that relationship and the exec teams are already very close, it seems that there's a real opportunity. So that's one of the things which I'm sort of doing at the moment. And Jane will be taking me around Lambeth, Trieste in London. And will be taking me around Lambeth later. So I'll stop there. The only other thing I could talk about is innovation across South London, but I think, again, there's a lot of flux there, and I think I might talk about that more next time when I think we'll be in a slightly stronger position of knowing what's happening. Any questions or comments for me? More than welcome. Suzanne.
It's just a question for clarification. What were you saying about needing to rebalance things and give patient safety less prominence?
Well, if you look at in Penny Dash's review of the regulation, her point is quite strongly made that she thinks that there has been an over-focus on patient safety at the expense of the other arms of quality. The ones I mentioned: effectiveness, patient and user experience, accessibility, equity, efficiency. And she thinks there's been an overemphasis on that, and that we need to spend more time looking at those other strands of it.
Just respond to that. I think Penny Dash's report on the safety landscape was not the most compelling central report that I've read. And if you look at the way in which CQC rates organisations, they have allowed for years organisations to be marked as outstanding where their safety requires improvement. And I think that some of the comments that she made about organisations were a bit wide of the mark, so that her description of what the HSSIB does was inaccurate and unhelpful. But one of the things I'd want to come back to for us as an organisation is that I cannot see my way to accepting that our care would be good or outstanding if our safety required improvement. And whatever Penny Dash might think about the regulatory landscape, I'm really clear that as a board, we need to hold on to make sure that our services are as safe as possible. Not that safety gets in the way of other things, but that we see it as an integral part of the quality of care we offer.
I'd certainly agree that safety's got to be absolutely central to what we offer. Abby, I'll let you.
I think I've read Penny Dash's reports, and I think what she referred to is quality as in how Aradazi defined quality in terms of safety, experience and effectiveness. And maybe some of the emphasis has been more on the safety to the detriment of effectiveness and patient and service user experience. And I would agree with her to some extent on that. I don't think it's a case of reducing the focus on safety. It's about increasing the focus on experience and effectiveness as well. And all three domains of quality work together. So if your treatment is effective and you're listening to your patients, it will be safe. So it's how we look at all three together to know that we're delivering a quality service.
Thanks, Joe. Just a reflection really on that, being relatively new to the trust and having come from a position where I had views of many trusts. What has struck me here is that we probably have the balance right, and there's not a challenge. I don't think there's a challenge to us to change that, and I don't think that Penny's report should challenge us to change things, but we need to make sure that there is that equilibrium between patient experience, patient safety, and clinical outcomes. I think that's a really important thing. We do it better than most here in getting that balance right, in my experience.
Just struggling to understand this. I admit I haven't read Penny Dash's report, but so I'm struggling to understand this. I'm looking to Jane and Abby maybe as clinicians for an example, or a situation where you could overemphasize safety at the expense of effectiveness and experience. What does that look like?
Shall I try? Or do you want to go first, Iffy?
No, I was just going to comment and say that it's fairly typical to hear people talk about quality and safety, which is nonsense, really. Quality of care encompasses safety, effectiveness of outcomes, and patient experience. But for some reasons over the years, people have just decided to separate the two, as though safety is one thing that sits over there and quality over there. And I think that that's the balance that Penny is trying to bring about, to say, if you're thinking about exactly as Abby has described, if you're providing care on an individual basis, you need to satisfy the three. And as an organization, we have struggled, and I'll put my hands up and say we've struggled for the last 15 years about how we actually measure all three and can convince ourselves all the time that we're doing well. But it's good to hear Martin's reflection as someone who has overseen lots of services, that we are at least trying our best. We haven't got there. I don't think anybody will ever get there, but it's good to continue to push, that we continue to push the boundary.
Thank you. I completely agree. What I took from the report wasn't that patient safety wasn't important. It was as equally important as effectiveness and patient experience and equality. But somehow it seemed to have been pushed up the agenda because the external scrutiny and so many duplicative processes emphasising patient safety made it feel a higher priority. patient safety is always going to be a really high priority, but some of the patient safety things that we're grappling with can be dealt with through clinical effectiveness and outcome measures and PROMs and patient experience and PREMs, and I think it's triangulating them all together. So I don't think we will see much change here, but what we might see is less burden of external regulations and us feeding information out in the name of patient safety, where we can do a lot more internal work ourselves, which we are doing through PSAF.
Thank you. A helpful calibrating discussion, so thank you for that. Any other comments or questions? No? Ivy, to you.
Thank you, Chair. So, as I often do, I'll assume that my report is read and we'll take questions, but there are just a few things I want to either emphasize or draw attention to, and some other information that may not be in my report. So I think it's useful to start with the 10-year health plan, but acknowledge, of course, that we're going to spend some time on that later this afternoon. Welcome right across the NHS, no doubt. But is it really dominating the airwaves? It certainly is, because as I said earlier, there's certain aspects of it that are stuff we need to do here and now, and then the other things that are over the next few years, right up to the 10 years. I think that we should, later when we discuss the 10-year plan, be looking at how our strategy either aligns with it or what more we need to do. But we should also be mindful that there's some work going on about the implementation of the 10-year health plan. And I'm really pleased that exec members have been engaged in those wider discussions. So for example, I've been in a couple of events, podcast and webinar on 10-year health plan, what foundation trusts like ours should be doing, what mental health and community health organizations should be doing. Ian is going to be speaking later this month to chief execs and chairs on neighborhoods, which is something that we're beginning to get a number of others asking questions because they are really interested. As part of the implementation groups, there are a few of them that I'm party to. There's the workforce group for neighborhoods. So what should the workforce for the neighborhoods look like? How should we support them, etc.? That's led by Andrew Bland. And then, of course, there's also the implementation group on quality. People may well have heard about the new service frameworks that are intended in the coming months, where we're thinking about 7 particular areas of clinical care and being able to define what they should look like right across organizations. And this isn't so much about what your teams should look like. It's more about the outcomes that you should be seeking. So leaving it to people to determine how they achieve those outcomes. And I think it's also really quite interesting that the CQC, I'm part of a group working with the CQC, thinking about how they assess providers in terms of the leadership. And there is discussion about in neighborhoods where you have different people working together, who do you inspect, who do you hold accountable, and what are the expectations? So just to say that the 10-year health plan raises loads and loads of questions, but at least we're spending time as we should trying to tease out what the way forward should be. And I hope we can touch on some of that later. Still building on a 10-year health plan, you see my report talks about the guidance we received from NHS England about completing our 5-year plan, 2026 right through to 2030. This is not just for us as providers, but also as ICS, and ASRA is going to lead from an ICS point of view as our representative because we've been asked to appoint an executive who will lead that work. First phase of that, as you see in my report, should be in by the end of September, and then more detailed submission by December. And I'm sure we'll find the opportunity to discuss this with the board. This is unusual because we've always done 1-year plans, right? And now we need to do 5 years. So I think what is sad about it, if I may say so, is the time scale too short to really be able to put together a proper 5-year plan. But we'll certainly do our absolute best, and I would expect the board's input into that. So much has been said about neighborhood health services. It feels to me as if this is the new NHS, and in fact, similar acronyms, right? So anything that's not working in the NHS, we say, oh, neighborhood will fix it. And the only news used on that is that the SR, you will recall that Bexley were the integrator or the host, where we know that, and we put in an application to be the integrator or the host for Greenwich. And we heard a few days ago that the 4 senior responsible officers have reviewed our application alongside the application from LGT, and will be recommending us as the integrator or the host for Greenwich to the Healthy Greenwich Partnership Board meeting, which will be next week. So we should hear before long. And I really would think that the Madam Secretary will find time in our board diary so we can have a proper discussion about neighborhoods as a board. Not in this structure, I think in a different structure, what it would mean for us as an organization, as an integrator across 2 boroughs, I hope, if we're successful in Greenwich, what we can bring to the table and how we can use our position to drive the benefits that are intended of this way of working. And then I thought I would just draw attention to further changes in NHS organizational landscape, as though people here don't know already. We're going from 42 ICBs down to 26. 15 of those are new clusters. You may have read in the last week or so that the chairs of the ICBs, including the clusters, have just been approved by the Secretary of State. The Chief Executive will follow suit. And there is a suggestion that even the clusters by 26-27 will merge. And I have a feeling that we haven't quite got there yet. And the reason I say that is that the 50% reduction in ICB costs hasn't quite been achieved. Some ICBs have had to hold fire on that, partly because they haven't got assurance about redundancy costs. And so they haven't even gone out to consultation, etc. So that's just an additional layer of complexity in the system. NHS oversight framework, we'll have the chance to talk about later what it means for us. But as I hinted earlier, the good thing about it from my perspective is that it's not just all about money or about performance, but it touches on feedback from people who use services. It touches on feedback from those who provide services, i.e. our staff. And there are some new additions. So it's not something that's fixed. I think that either every quarter, every few months, there are going to be additional metrics that will be added. Abby just reminded me that there's a metric that's going to be added about doctors, which I wasn't quite aware of, and so there's constantly that revision, which would really keep us on our toes. And of course, it's not the only thing we need to respond to, but it really will go a long way in determining how the center views providers. If you're not in the top north, 1 or 2, then you're probably going to have people having conversations with you, distracting you from doing your business. And that's why it's really important. And it's probably fair to say that whilst everything we do is important, there's some things that we need to accept. We just can't, we cannot but keep a very, very close eye on. And that's all I wanted to say. There's a lot more in there, but please, if there are any questions, do ask me. Thank you.
Mine is not a question, it's a comment. So if you were away when we received a letter on the 29th of August about the 10-point plan to improve resident doctors' working life. So there are 10 things that trusts are being asked to look at. And one of them is the trust board has to appoint an executive lead to make sure that we're delivering on this plan. We're still waiting for guidance. So they're to appoint an executive lead and a resident doctor representative who will come to the board and present the progress against the 10-point plan. So the letter was sent by Professor Magana Pandey, the National Medical Director, and Jim Mackey as well. It did come up at the monthly meeting we have with them yesterday, and one of the immediate actions is that progress against the 10-point plan will be included in the NOF immediately. I'm not sure what that means. I've looked at the plan and we do benchmark quite well against some of the things that we're being asked to review in the plan. So I will keep the board updated once we've got much more information around that.
Thank you. It's slightly worrying. I mean, a good thing for support resident doctors, totally 100% in favour of that one, but slightly worrying that if the NOF becomes a tool for getting initiatives driven at that higher level, that's actually slightly worrying, though totally support resident doctors being well supported and trained. Jim.
Just a quick comment to say I'm really pleased that we've been chosen to be the IHO for Greenwich. And well done to the team for getting that through, because I think that's really important for us as a trust.
Subject, of course, to the final decision, but yes, thank you.
And also hoping he wouldn't get in the way of our partnership working and our relationships. People know what I mean.
So thank you, Iffy, for that. If there are no more questions, we'll move on. But I think that's really positive, and actually a really good chance for us now to sit down, as you were saying, Iffy, and think about what is it that we want to achieve to make this a success, having in a way got the initial thing over. Actually, that's a really interesting thing. What do we want to do differently that will make neighbourhood teams really drive the change that we want them to drive? Ian, the operational report, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So as usual, there's quite a lot of detail contained in the reading room, but I'll just bring to life a few things from the front sheet. Sticking with the theme of neighbourhood, I won't prolong the conversation, but just to highlight that in Bexley we were one of several local systems that put ourselves forward to participate in the national neighbourhood implementation programme. I understand from a conversation we had at the ICB executive yesterday that it's likely that 5 place-based systems will be put forward from London, and a decision will be announced tomorrow at either 5 or 5:30 p.m. It will then be which will then be embargoed and will be subject to a formal announcement either by the Secretary of State or the Prime Minister the following Friday. But in the meantime, we're kind of moving along in Bexley. Myself and Sarah Birchall and Lorraine Regan are participating with other system colleagues as part of the partnership, ably supported by PPL to kind of progress the work that we've been doing for some time, which is effectively the building blocks of neighbourhood working. And one of the things that we're trying to think about is what is the additionality of participating in that national programme, and how we might kind of think about what the gaps are if we're not successful. But yeah, I would kind of really highlight that I think tonally and the kinds of things that we're talking about are absolutely right and spot on. So fills me with lots of positivity. Just a two or three things just to kind of highlight from the report itself. I just wanted to mention the work that colleagues in adult learning disabilities have been doing with partners at the PRU. The board will remember that we've had a presentation here previously about the work that the Directorate does at QE, and we're not funded in the same way to provide that at the PRU, but the team have really taken the challenge that I think the executive gave them at a recent operational review to kind of think about how that working could start to happen there. And colleagues will be aware that there was a article in the national press this week just reminding us about the differential life expectancy of adults with learning disability. So the importance of this work can't be understated, and I think the PRU have been very welcoming and open to that. We've had quite a lot of conversations in certainly at the quality board subcommittee about our bed recovery programme. We're still facing challenges around our flow, but overall things are moving in the right direction. In terms of our acute older out of area placements, they are continuing to reduce, and we are not kind of using spot purchases at all. Having said that, we have seen a recent growth in PQ out of area placements, which we are working through. And the ongoing challenges around creating flow and eliminating variation between wards. Recent statistics show that there's still 23% of our admitted patients who are staying longer than 60 days, but it is coming down. And I was just discussing with Fareed the fact that in the last 2 days we have discharged 19 patients from our acute wards, which I'm still trying to get my head around how we've done that, but it's I'm going to see that as a kind of positive, and we are on track to reopen the remaining ward that we closed during COVID in October. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight was in offender healthcare, and what feels quite significant down in the southwest, which is the lifting of the oversight measures at HMP Exeter. And I think, and we did discuss this again at Quality Committee, how that is indicative, along with some other things, of how far we've gone in our journey with Southwest Prisons, and relating that back to the BAF and some of our kind of directorate risks. It does feel that things have really turned a corner there. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight the great work that the directorate are doing. Of course, in other parts of the directorate, we still have challenges, and we are continuing to action plan our response to the recent CQC inspection at HMP Rochester. And the final thing, in terms of kind of performance metrics, again, something we look at the quality subcommittee, we have started to see improvements in our waiting times, particularly across particular services in adult community physical health, CAMS, and specialist children's. And you'll have seen at the bottom of the front sheet a slightly different menu of performance metrics exceptions. This is partly because of the NOF and the things that we're being asked to look at nationally, and also because we are trying to highlight locally within our pack a kind of, and have more focus on waiting times more generally. So I think we've got to a point now where there is that good line of sight into all our services. And that's it.
Thank you. Questions or comments for Ian, please? Can I ask about those metrics at the moment? Because at the moment it's good to see them divided at the back, how they are. And I know that they're scrutinised by the Quality Committee, and I don't want us to repeat that work. But what I find difficult is saying how many of those are ones that we're really worried about that are moving, that aren't moving, how many of them are perhaps they're out, they're moving in the right direction, and you're fairly confident that the action plan is dealing with that. Are there any there that you would highlight, and perhaps thinking about the report going forward, that actually we should be concerned about at board level because they are sticky and not moving, or really way out?
Yeah, there are several that I think I would highlight, some of which I think colleagues have probably heard me talk about. So I think there remains a challenge around our CYP autism diagnostics and CYP ADHD. So that would be one area. Another would be around our kind of 4-week wait to second contact at the mental health hubs. I mean, I don't want to steal Suzanne's thunder. I think we're taking a slightly different approach in the quality committee, which is to kind of look in a bit more detail at particular kind of aspects of this. So we had a really helpful presentation from Lorraine Regan around the hubs. But I think so those were the ones that I think are particularly kind of concerning. I think CAMS access is definitely moving in the right direction. And we are measuring that reduction where we've had really long waits, and we're kind of measuring the progress. But where we've got particular challenges, and the ones I've highlighted point to this, some of that is about the system context and whether we simply have the capacity to meet the demand. Are there things that we can do differently? And we're certainly exploring that. And I will highlight probably the next board around the work around the CYP neurodevelopmental hub. So we are looking at ways trying to innovate our way out of this. But there is also something which I think came up in the conversation earlier about how we influence other bits of the system to think about their responsibility. And that's a big conversation, I think, that we'll probably return to, particularly around kind of mental health transformation, neighbourhoods and the community.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in with a second question, and if nobody else is. In the community mental health one, you highlight the problem there of inappropriate referrals. And it seems that from my board visits, anecdotal, but that's actually not an uncommon problem, that 10, 15, 20% of referrals may be inappropriate to a particular service, often by a professional or something like that. And so there are lots of initiatives that are going on doing that one. Is that something that we do at a trust level, or is that something that the individual services are doing? And is that something that there might be, I don't know, some sort of AI solution to help people refer to the right place? Because it is, it will be a constant problem to educate GPs as to exactly where to refer, because our language is different from the language over the boundary, et cetera, et cetera. There are lots of reasons why. Is there a way in which we can help that at a trust level rather than individual services?
So I think in terms of mental health more broadly, this is actually a conversation that I've had recently with one of the PCN clinical directors in Greenwich about having a kind of clearer checklist, if you like, of things that we would ask GPs to consider prior to referral. And I think it's something that we could revisit, but it's something that I think we could revisit as part of that neighbourhood conversation. I think in relation to talking therapies, there's a specific point that the service is trying to make, which is that we used to be measured around access. Access meant that we had to kind of lower the bar in terms of kind of acceptance criteria. As soon as you lower the bar, you get more complex presentations. The more complex the presentation, the more difficult it then becomes to kind of meet another performance criteria, which is completing treatment and also the outcome that people receive. So it's a kind of a bit of a circular argument, but I think the focus on access has reduced. So I think there is now that possibility to really think about who we accept in that service. That was just to give a bit of additional context.
Yeah, so just thinking about whether AI could help, I think absolutely. If we get good quality data referrals, then I know Lorraine and I have been talking to a company that we've been speaking to for over a year now around whether AI could help with triage. And so I think that's definitely a possibility for the future. But thinking upstream, how could GPs have kind of AI layered on into the GP system, say EMIS, to ensure that when referrals are created, they are then sent to the right place immediately. So, but it does stem from having good quality information in the first place to enable the AI to have something to look at.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Ian, for your report. We now move on to the non-executive director's report, and I'll again go around the table for non-executives, and then I will ask if there are any visits that non-execs weren't on for perhaps the exec to sweep up on. I'll kick off. So there are 4 reports from visits that I was involved in: the Bexley ADAPT team, the Can You Understand group at this hospital site, the Greenwich East ICMP, and the perinatal team. Very, very different teams, very, very different groups doing different tasks. I've also been in quite a few others, and so some of my reflections here may also be bringing in things from other visits that haven't yet, paperwork hasn't yet, reports haven't yet been written, but very different. I mean, the Can You Understand It group of people who are helping us have learning difficulties, really helping work on the information sheets and the leaflets. And Asra, you and I went, and it was I think the thing, a bit like what we heard this morning from Ollie, that it makes a difference, but actually seeing them work hard and the letters and so on improving in front of your very eyes was actually very humbling, and I was really quite taking that one. You've got the perinatal team working with many different providers across the trusts, across the patch. I mean, many different acute providers, ADAPT and ICMP. So I won't go through the reports in public. I just want to pull out some themes. I'd say in all of them, in all of the writing, Can You Understand It, probably not relevant, but from the other ones, from all of our services, and I go around the services, I get the impression that recruitment is moving in the right direction, that the use of agency is going down. I think sometimes the question you have to ask is, are the people recruiting the right people? We've got to make sure that the desire to recruit doesn't mean that we recruit the wrong people who aren't ready for it. And I think that's something that might be an issue in some places, but less in others. I think there is a question, and overall, if you go back and you look at a lot of the visits I've done, there's often what I'd say is relatively minor but consistent complaints about access to clinic space. And again, is there a way in which we can, I think the space is often there, because in one case they were complaining about clinic space that day, and I walked out and there were a lot of empty rooms in the corridor next door. And I think it's about how do we think about using spaces differently and thinking about ownership of spaces in a different way. So I think that there may be solutions to that. I also think, I think I've seen some very strong functioning teams, and I've seen some teams that frankly have been struggling a bit more, and trying to think about what the difference is. And often the well functioning teams are those who've got a really strong and defined purpose that they've all got. The other teams tend to have perhaps are less aware, are less on top of what their actual function is and what they're trying to achieve. And I think that often seems to me to be a big difference. I've already mentioned referral in my question to Ian, and I think that there is an issue around referral to services and people and whether we can tidy that one up. And then the other thing I'd say, which is a slight disappointment, is the use of data. I'm increasingly asking people about their outcomes and how do they know they're doing a good job. And they know they're doing a good job in a narrative sense. and they often know that there is some data that shows that they're doing a good job, but they don't come back with the sort of 37% of people do this, 97% of people do this. It's not in our nature to use data in that way. And I think we've seen one or two other instances where I've been involved where there's one case where I was given the data that was totally wrong, and it was obviously totally wrong, but it's because nobody had actually looked at it and understood the data. And I do think that we need to think perhaps a bit more overall about how we help our people use data better in order both as a management tool and also because if they're not able to tell me the story of what their good outcomes are in data centers, that suggests to me that they're not looking at that data as often as they should do. There are big exceptions, and there was a great. I went on a visit yesterday, and they had an improvement project, and they knew exactly how that project had improved their outcomes, and it was very, very precise, and that was great. So it's not an absolute one, but I'd just say that that's perhaps something that's been a bit of a disappointment across the board. So I'll stop there. Yes, Sophie.
Yeah, just in terms of questions that we ask, I was very late handing in the reports, which hasn't come to this board, which for a visit I went on with Rachel and Lorraine. And Lorraine asked a really good question, which was, if your patients were here now, what would they say about the experience that they had of this service? And I thought that was a really interesting question, which the team found it quite difficult to answer. And it's not a question that I've necessarily asked across all of them. So I think that's another thing that we really need to be thinking about. We go on board visits. How much do you value patient experience, and how much do you know about your patient experience, similarly to how much you know about the data?
Thank you. That's a really, really good, I think, and I think that's would be a really good question for us to have in our quiver. Rachel.
Thanks. I just wanted to pick up on your point, Andrew, about recruitment. So things are changing. It is feeling a bit different. We are making headway on our vacancies. We're seeing some better pipelines. Jane was talking about this, and we obviously know that we can't continue to grow in the way that we have in the past. And that does provide, and Ian and I were talking about this quite recently, it does provide a real opportunity for us in driving up standards about what it means to be an Oxleas clinician. So that's something I think we want to be unpacking a bit more in this different context around staffing. What does that mean for the sorts of people we want to recruit and how we can keep driving up standards?
Thank you, Rachel. I think that's a really good point. And I'd just like to add, the other thing I would say is a consistent theme in most of them is the care that people are taking now about recruitment and the pride that they're taking in young people, young to the profession, I should say, not necessarily young in age, young to the profession people, and bringing them on and talking about how they've had a student here and then they've been able to attract the student back, and then they've been somebody who's moved from an associate position to either a nurse or a therapist or whatever, and being quite imaginative about it. And I think that's a really good sign as well. So I think that conversation is probably a good conversation to start having as well, Rachel, as we do move into the new era. Not that recruitment is solved, but we're in a different place than we were even a year ago. I think it's probably true to say.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll move counterclockwise just because I am. And if you haven't got one, just say so. Manita, I know you do actually.
Thank you. Very good visits. I don't think I had anything particular flagged that wasn't in the report other than sort of one anecdote. We did have someone who I met in the visit who had recently joined us from SLAM. And she was very positive about her experience sort of being onboarded, being treated as an individual. So that was very positive to hear. But I did ask her about Oxleas' reputation at SLAM. And she said it was very poor, that we are known, that we're known to be unresponsive, that we don't get back to them, and we don't, basically unresponsive. And there wasn't an action from that, but for me, it was a good reminder, and I'll bring it up today, that we shouldn't be complacent, because it was interesting to hear that fed back to us, that actually we have a poor reputation from what she knew.
None from me, but there is one I think that potentially has got lost in the system from, it's a legacy acute and crisis visit think Goddington, but I can check that out and bring it up next time. And there's one, as I said, that I missed, which will be also here next time.
None for me in the pack, but we've been to the southwest, so that'll be next time round.
We had a couple of visits cancelled over the last couple of months, but we have some coming up in the September and October, so next time.
So there's one in here from me, which was a visit to two of the district nursing teams. And to some extent, the visit reflects a bit what you were saying about recruitment, because both of the teams, to my recollection, were now at more or less at full staffing levels. In terms of the sort of thematics which came out for me, which are not necessarily there in the report, there were two things. One was an observation that the staff survey outcomes in relation to one of the teams that we met seemed quite discrepant, in that the team itself described its functioning in a way that was much more positive than you might think from the staff survey. And I have wondered in the past about the extent to which, the National Staff Survey really does represent the experience of staff in terms of some of the things that they see as valuable in their work. And also that we do the staff survey once a year, which means that there can be really considerable change in teams from one year to another. Albeit that we sometimes think nothing changes at all. It's quite striking to see things very different. So it did make me reflect a bit on that, and therefore the importance of these visits, in that they give us different insights from what we might get from the staff survey. The other thing, and this has come across from the visits that I've started to do with forensics, which haven't got reports in this pack, is just how incredibly important to our staff are the relationships with patients. That's from all of the things that they talk about as the satisfactions of their work. It's having a relationship with patients, sometimes in the case of the district nursing teams for a very long time, and the quality of care, I think, is very much rooted in those relationships, and it's not something we're very good at measuring. So there's something for me in there about how we understand the significance of the relational elements of the care that we provide, as well as the measurable outcomes.
So I'm unaligned, so no report from me, but my induction seems interminable and continues on. And I continue to visit, and it's great to visit the services. As I said to you the other day, I think I'm marinated rather than inducted now, but we'll get there. I think just to draw out a couple of the themes that people have brought out, which I would reflect I have seen, and a little note of caution. So space repeatedly gets mentioned, and I, like you, have made the observation there's plenty of space here. There's not many people here, but it is in people's head, and I think we've got to hear that and be conscious of it in our communications out. Even and it's a constant theme, isn't it? There's two rules in nursing: never get involved in conversations about uniform and hats, and never get involved in office moves or ward moves, because they just lead to trouble. And I think it's always going to be people's head. Have they got the space they want to work in? And we've got to listen to that. And the second thing, great on recruitment, and we've seen some big improvements. You can see that in the data. But there are one or two areas where there is real intransigence in recruiting full-time permanent staff. And where those happen, it's mainly, and Abby and I, we've talked about this during interviews, it's mainly in some of the psychiatric posts, which are really difficult nationally to recruit to. And that has a real effect on those teams. The upside of that is when you do recruit permanently, you can see the cloud lifting off the directorate leader, saying, thank goodness we've got someone and they're great. And so whilst we've got great recruitment and there's real over recruitment, as Jane was saying, we've just got to remind when you can't recruit to key roles, it really has a downside on patient experience, patient safety, and the quality of service overall we deliver.
Just a quick comment following up from what Suzanne said about the level of care that our staff give to our patients and service users. I mean, I've been unfortunate to be on mortality committee now for about three or four sessions, and it just amazes me that we go through the people who have unfortunately passed away, and our staff know each individual, you know, and the end of life care as well, and they care for each individual. And I just think that should be sort of mentioned, and I'm not sure whether that's measured. But it is, I mean, every time we go to mortality, it's quite an experience to think about the people that pass away, but also the staff know each individual quite individually. So I think they do really well.
Thank you. So I think there's some themes there that perhaps we can draw out in the minutes and then see what we can do. For Stephen, the space is going to be is always intractable, as Rachel will know. And in some places, actually, there is some of the prisons there is a real space problem. There really isn't space to do stuff. Yesterday we were looking at a place and wondering whether they could move the washing machines out to put some patients in, but that was that being previously occupied by horses, so I don't know. Okay, thank you, colleagues, for those reports, and I think I'm really pleased that what we're doing now more is pulling out the major ones, or what things we want to highlight out of those reports. I think that's to me that's helpful. Okay, let's move on to the committee reports. Quality Committee, Suzanne.
So first of all, Ian is welcome to steal my thunder as often as you like. Because there is a lot of business that the Quality Committee gets through. I feel I should speak to a couple of the alerts. One on HMP Rochester, which Ian has already mentioned. We did think it was important that board is aware of the ongoing issues with Rochester. There are difficulties there, but we're working very, very hard on resolving them. And both the quality team and regional manager are involved there in supporting the on-site leaders. One of the real difficulties with Rochester is grappling with the site, which prevents us doing some really basic stuff like dispensing people's medication promptly and safely. But we will continue to work on that. The second alert I think I should draw attention to was the sad news that we heard from Jane, that we had a death of a patient on an inpatient ward. It is sad both for the family and for the staff. We wanted to just be clear that there is a patient safety incident investigation underway. For those who haven't sort of followed the ever-shifting language of safety, the patient safety incident investigation is the more systemic version of what used to be done as a root cause analysis, and it's part of our patient safety plan, or any death of this sort will automatically get a full patient safety incident investigation. So moving on to some of the assurances, we received a very interesting presentation by the Offender Healthcare Directorate. Prisons are a challenging area in which to be offering healthcare, and whilst there are some issues, and I don't want to gloss over those, I also would want to draw people's attention to the fact that a number of our sites have received positive CQC and HMIP inspection outcomes. So we want to recognise those, as well as the fact in some cases we recognise there's more focus needed on certain aspects of some of our prison care. And I think it should be acknowledged because people, I think that the DNA reduction project at HMP East Sutton Park was published in BMJ Open Quality and shortlisted for an HSJ award, which is really fantastic for a small prison service. In terms of the patient safety group, I won't add anything except for drawing attention to what I think was very interesting in the Smart Notes pilot. I'm really glad that we've been piloting this, and the pilot has identified that we will need to audit quite carefully that notes are being checked properly, because there's a temptation to rely upon AI to be more accurate than sometimes it is. So we had a discussion about this at the Quality Committee, and Alison provided us with some assurance that as the pilot develops and Smart Notes may be rolled out in future, that appropriate audit processes will be included. On the clinical effectiveness group, just wanted to mention around the outcome measures. I think all of us are quite excited about the idea that we might begin to see really crisp information about outcomes coming from the use of dialogue and other clinical scores. And so we look forward to that in future. And I it's taken a long time for this to come. But I think that once we start to get those data, they're going to be very valuable. And the other thing that I just wanted to draw attention to as well, I think we received the annual report as well as a report from the clinical effectiveness group on research and innovation. And although it's still very early days, the current team has really built up from a quite low base our research activity. So just moving on quickly, and it goes to the point you were making about metrics, Andrew. The committee has received for the first time a redesigned performance update, and it was really useful. And I wanted to just note the work which has gone into that, because we do get a much clearer view now, both of the metrics and also of what's being done about areas that we have some anxieties about. And then the last thing I just wanted to draw attention to, it was a really excellent presentation by the peer engagement facilitator and the involved group about the work that they've been doing on developing further the involvement of carers in care plans. And they've been using the peer engagement facilitator to lead the way here in both developing an approach, but also helping staff to understand how important it is that they have that really good dialogue with members of the family in the process of developing the care plan. There's obviously further work that happening on this on Abby's side, so to speak, but I think that there's been a kind of pincer movement between the involved group and clinical leaders to make sure that we really do move forward in involving families in care planning.
Questions or comments? Sophie?
Yeah, just a comment really, and that kind of underlines what my point earlier about integrating that involvement, so we don't just put all the weight on the peer engagement facilitators and the patients and carers that we're involving, that actually becomes part of what the staff do. So it's really good to see this pincer movement, and it would be great to see it replicated elsewhere.
Thank you. I have one question about the item you have around the actions taken around BFDs and the there's going to be summarising responses to recent prevention of future death notices coming forward. I think it might be useful from time to time to actually also look back at historic PFDs, because we often say people say that they will do something, and then sort of 4 years later, that has slipped off the agenda. And I think that one of the things that does come out of a lot of the reports that we're seeing coming out now is that there's a frustration with the NHS having to keep on learning. We learn something and then we forget it. Sorry, Jane, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, Dr. Emma Padfield, our patient safety specialist, did a review of PFDs over the last few years to look at whether everything had been implemented and whether there was any additional learning, looking at it through a collective system lens. And she did come up with some really helpful examples. What we're also doing is we don't get a lot of preventing future deaths, average of about 3 a year. So to suddenly get a few from different prisons across the country, and we're noticing that PFDs are being issued to prisons, be it the governor, to the Secretary of State, or to somebody else, or to the health provider. They seem to be increasing. So I want to have a bit of a look at that collectively and see what's going on there as well. But we do go back, we review annually and every couple of years just to look and see what the collective.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. Thank you, Jim.
Just to update on that, on the learning element. Again, it's been a persistent, almost issue discussion point at Quality when I was there. And we had at the last pick, which is obviously not reported here, a really interesting presentation from, was it Nick, Jane, about the DICEs. So it's a new program within forensics about learning and how we can embed that learning. It was really, really interesting. I'm not sure if you want to speak to it, Jane.
Is it the TRACS model?
Yeah, the TRACS model.
What the head of nursing, Annie Dale, in the Southwest has done is she's gone back and looked at all of the incidents, the ones that are still being investigated, legacy investigations, and ones that are coming up. And actually, she's done such a good thematic review. She's come up with an acronym called DTRACS Plus. I can't go through everything, but it's like documentation, engagement, professional curiosity, all of the issues. We have asked for this to be mapped across in the Southeast prisons, so the head of nursing there is doing that as well. And then actually this framework is going to give the improvement plan sort of an overlay, and also any new incidents coming out, they'll be able to map them to that quickly through the response reviews. And it should mean that we're not waiting months and months for an internal investigation which follows a clinical review, which follows a PPO review, and actually doesn't tell us anything new that we didn't already know within the response review. So it's really, really proactive.
I think it's great.
That's fascinating. Thank you. That's really good. Excellent. Thank you. Jim, can we move on to the business and infrastructure incorporating the Green Plan?
Okay, thanks, Chair. I will assume that the paper's read and just maybe highlight some of the points that may link into the discussions we're having today and maybe this afternoon. Nothing to alert the board to. In terms of assurance, at month 4, as it says in the report, we're break even, but this was using non-recurrent means. So the topic of SIPs and SIPs going forward this year and next year as being a large topic of discussion, and that's now embedded with living within our means. And so maybe that's something we'll discuss in part 2 within that programme. One good piece of news is we're reducing our agency, but the agency is moving to bank. So our bank is increasing. So it's really good from a care point of view, but in terms of payroll, etc., that's not actually necessarily going down. So again, something to talk about within living within our means. Moving on, we'll be talking about the Wandsworth reprocurement part 2, so I won't mention that now. But we also did have a fairly lively discussion around us being unfortunately unsuccessful with the Greenwich MSK bid, and our approach to potentially signifying how we feel about that to the system. And so Ian is taking the lead in discussing that and our opinion on that back to the system. I think that was a really balanced view. As I said, the BIC is taking an oversight view on living within our means, and lots of discussions in BIC and outside of, and how we're going to manage that and how things are progressing. Again, part 2, I think we'll be discussing that in more detail, so I'll leave that to then. Interesting discussions. Obviously, we've had estates and digital feedback as well. But one of the interesting discussions around PLIX, a very dry subject. We had our PLIX discussion and submission. But from my point of view, that's data. So that's the theme of what we're talking about today. How can we make the submission? How can we use that data effectively within our transformation, within our innovation? And that's interesting. We did have a discussion around the headline figures that come out of the PLIX, which will inform perception. And so one of the things you can read from that is that we've had an 11.8% cost increase, but only a 4% activity level increase. Now, there's lots of nuances around that. We can dig into that. But unfortunately, that's going to be the perception that we see and the perception around productivity. And I think that's something that we might need to address going forward, potentially as a board as well. I think I'm nearly done. Again, we did look at the refresh green plan and went through that in quite a lot of detail. And just one other point to note is that we are having increased oversight over the Bexley PFI because timescales are getting very short on that, and I'm sure Steve will be discussing that at length going forward. And there is a concern that at the timescales are getting to such a point that we may need to make decisions without having everything in place. So we're thinking about plan A, plan B, plan C, but it's something to notify to the board that's something coming our way, and it could be quite important to us, especially financially. I think that's it, really. Oh, yes. And just mentioned about the WAN procurement. I think there is the BIC approved this to come in terms to come to the board, but I think there's a slight addition to the WAN now, and says it was for 5 years, and now we're looking at it to be 5 years plus one, i.e. that we have the choice to add 1 year and then another year. It's our choice, but it does bring it above the limit for BIC. We would like the board to delegate the BIC to review this plus one, discuss it, and do that within BIC. Alison, is there anything else you want to mention on that?
You want to say something as well? Or
It was picked up right at the end. So without the +1+1, it was within BIC approval limits. When the paperwork came through, it was 5 years +1+1, which takes it to board. It has been fully reviewed by both the executive and by the Business and Infrastructure Committee. So the differential would be it's a recommendation from BIC for the board to approve.
Thank you. And there is a break clause at the end of the 5 and at the other one. So in actual fact, in a way, BIC are within their right to the 5 years, but it's the +1+1 we're doing. Are the board happy to approve that? Getting nods around the table, so we will approve that. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, any other questions for Jim? No, in that case, we'll move on to Nina, the People's Committee, please.
Thank you, and thank you to Rachel, who's put together a really comprehensive report. There's just 5 things that I'd like to pull out. Happy to take questions on the remainder of the report. On alert, we had a discussion at People Committee around industrial action. We discussed the Trust's experience of the industrial action at the end of July, and we've agreed to keep under review the risk of industrial action going forward. So we're not adding it as a risk at the moment, but we are keeping that under review. In terms of assurance, we recommend to board that a statement of compliance with our statutory requirements is agreed in respect of the annual report on revalidation of medical doctors for appraisal year ended March 25. So I'm happy to pause there.
I assume we're happy with that. It seems appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. We had a discussion around the work in living within our means and reducing agency spending, which reflects a lot of intense targeted activity, and we're seeing some really good progress in district nursing, community mental health, and offender healthcare in particular, but clearly it's an ongoing programme of work. In respect of health and safety, we adopted a new risk relating to the quality of health and safety risk assessments, and we will keep under close review the work that is ongoing to pause audits in 25-26 that we had trailed at an earlier meeting, and that will use the resource instead to focus on training for quality risk assessments. The logic being that that really is the starting point for our ability to be able to assure ourselves on health and safety. We did discuss a very comprehensive annual health and safety update, which I'm happy to take questions on. And we also received the RES and the DES action plans, which I'm also happy to take questions on.
Thank you, Nina. That's a busy meeting. Questions or comments, please?
I'm not sure whether this is for committee, but I found myself wondering where we were on the Supreme Court judgment for Women Scotland and the impact that that should have on the NHS. Is that something that's being discussed at People Committee?
No, it's not, and Rachel's nodding her head. Can you leave that with us? I confess I don't know enough about that. So can you leave that with Rachel and I to take forward, unless you know more about it than I do? Rachel, go ahead.
Can I just check, Suzanne, are you talking about the implications for staff or the implications for patients?
Both.
I mean, I wonder whether this is something where it's an important one. We've been waiting for NHS guidance, which I don't think has come out unless it's slipped me past in the summer. I think that this is something in a way the executive need to consider in the round, because it's going to have implications for both staff and patients, isn't it? And then that will have implications for the Quality Committee and the People Committee. But it would seem that it should be looked at in the round. Ian?
I mean, it's not much of an update, but in terms of the kind of any impact on patients, this is something that I've been discussing in the Cavendish Square Q group. We're kind of monitoring how we're responding to that. So all trusts have kind of maintained previous policy on the basis that we would receive further guidance, which was expected in the summer and hasn't materialised. So I think it's a good thing to raise, because I think the longer there's a kind of hiatus, or it creates uncertainty, and that's not a good situation to put our colleagues or indeed our patients in. So yeah.
Are there any other questions on the content of the report?
No. So on that one, we'll ask the exec to consider the timing as we get in relationship to advice and take that forward.
Could I just, it was Rachel's last meeting at the July meeting, and I believe it's her last meeting today. And I just wanted to extend personal thanks for the journey that she's taken us on health and safety. It is a tiny part of what you do, but it has become a massive part of the focus of the committee. I took over with no knowledge, no experience back a few years ago in the summer of 2019. It was very soon after the Bracton and the HSE action. The journey that you've taken the board on with the training, with Safety Rocks, making sure that we were on the same page. I just want to commend you and Julian for the work that you've done. We now are in a very different position from the one that we were in a few years ago. And it is in very large part thanks to what you've done. So thank you.
Sorry, getting the thing. Well, thank you. Yes. And thank you on behalf of the whole board for that. Thank you, Nina, for doing that. That's good. Excellent. If there are no more questions, can we move on to the AWAC, and as well, will you speak in Damien's absence?
I am. So just to confirm that Damien has reviewed this report. So this is actually his report that I'm just going to present. So, and if Suzanne, because I think you were there. If you want to add anything after I've gone through in terms of anything that you feel you need to add. There is nothing to alert the board about. In terms of assurance, we had a good discussion actually on how we review internal audit reports and whether or not we spent enough time. We spent quite a bit of time usually on red or amber red reports, but whether or not we needed to spend more time on green reports. So a very good discussion and a reflection that we would, as well as going into some of the aspects where things are not going well, actually review the areas where things were going well and actually give some feedback and some praise about good practice. There was a presentation just in regards to the final audit findings report. We did submit our final audited accounts 2 days late. There were a host of reasons for that around a very complex audit and the bar being raised once again. We had agreed that there was going to be an audit wash-up. That has now taken place both internally and with Grant Thornton, and there will be an opportunity after, either before or after the next audit committee, to take board members through that particular process. KPMG basically reported back on the state of play along with the local counter fraud, on the progress of work this year. There was nothing, I don't think there was too much to raise within that area. The committee received the annual Freedom to Speak Up report, and also they reviewed the fit and proper persons test on behalf of the board. They signed off the risk and management framework policy, and again I think people find that very useful, just as a bit of a reminder of what good practice looks like within that area. And then also received some detailed reports on the risk management annual report, which is always very useful just to bring all of that together in terms of an entire review of the year, and the legal services report. I think those were the key elements I was going to raise in regards to the audit committee, unless Suzanne, you were there, if there was anything you wanted to add. Nina? I don't think you were. Yeah, that's what.
There's nothing I wanted to add, but I would note that I think that one of the recent innovations has been to be a bit more consultative when the terms of reference are being drawn up for internal audits. And I think that's been very helpful. And the auditors have been responsive to additional suggestions which have been made.
Thank you. Questions or comments for Suzanne and Asma? No, thank you very much. So Council of Governors report, which I'll take it as read, just to point out that there are governor elections sort of underway at the moment, and should be announced at the next governors meeting. The second point, which isn't really in here, but just so that people are aware, is that the 10-year plan did contain information about, did contain a line that the Board of Governors would no longer be necessarily needed for foundation trusts. That's not to say that we wouldn't want to need it, because I think we would argue that we do think governors provide a really useful function. However, guidance is dribbling out. Well, actually, I don't think it's even dribbling out. It's sort of promised to dribble out. And so we will be keeping an eye on that one, and I'm keeping in close, Sally and myself are keeping close contact with Tina around that one, and we'll do it. And I think the third thing I should point out there is that there's a very good photograph of Les in there, which I think we should highlight and show him having a good time with our music therapy, who will be at the next Council of Governors meeting. And so for those of you who want to have your photograph taken like that, come along and bring a nice T-shirt with you. Any questions or comments? No. In that case, we move on to reflections on this meeting. And we asked the question: did the meeting achieve our aims. I think in light of our discussion at the beginning, I'd also like us to really think about the second one. Has this meeting helped improve the experience of patients, and the experience of staff, and put those people back at the centre? Have we done a good job today in that one? If there was a patient or a member of staff watching us in this meeting, would they feel that we had heard their voice and taken them into account? I think that's something we should consider as part of that. So I'll shut up and make this open to comments.
Well, can I, if no one is going to speak up? I mean, I really thought that I think that the service user and carer involvement focus, all in particular, really helped us today in thinking about users of our services or patients, or and even the discussion about the involved group, trying to identify how we describe those we serve. So there's no question in my mind that we have considered and we've thought throughout this meeting about those where we serve. I think, of course, in the second part, there's going to be a lot of discussion about how do we then protect that and make sure that whatever we do going forward seeks to satisfy and provide for those that we serve.
Rachel.
Yeah, just building on that, I think it was really good to hear from Ollie and from Madison and Martin. But I think what was particularly important was that if we are going to hear people's direct experiences in the way that we did today, and I think it was very powerful, that we create enough time to do it, and we did. It was really nice that that bit of the agenda didn't feel hurried, because I think when this can feel performative is when you bring someone in, but you're almost all kind of hurrying on to the next part of the agenda. So I think it was right that we did, as we did today, give some really decent time to reflect on what he had said, because I think that's an important part of our values and the respect that we want to give to our patients.
Yeah, Rachel said some of what I was going to say, but also the point that it's not just Oxleas and what we do, but how we influence more widely. So I was particularly thinking about the conversations about schools and influencing schools. So how we share what we hear from our patients and carers with others in the service. And I'm sure we'll talk about that more as we move on to neighbourhood discussions.
Okay, thanks, Suzanne.
I've already said this to Manisa, but I think that her question to Ollie was really valuable in terms of helping us to understand that whilst when our service users come in and speak to us directly and ask us to do things better, we're all human and we want to respond and say, yes, we can definitely do that, or, it will definitely make a difference. And I think that what was really striking was to hear from Ollie that he's aware of the limitations which we face, but that it's really important to have the perspective heard. And I know that only goes a certain distance. You can't just do it as a performative piece. You do have to do things about the issues that are raised. But I think it's helpful to have that dialogue which establishes that it's good to hear about things we need to change. There are some things we can do, and there are some things which are beyond our scope. And I think this issue about engaging with the local community, it would be really tempting to think that we can hugely change what's happening in schools. We can have a little bit of impact on that, but I think that we need to be realistic about how far we can intervene in the culture and systems of organisations outside of our own.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. That's a helpful reflection, and I think we did spend, we spent rather longer on part one than we normally do, but I think that's been for the good, as people have described around here, and we perhaps need to think about how we do that in the future. But actually, I think we don't spend too long on the rest of the meeting. And I would reflect, as I mentioned before, I think actually the fact that people are being more thematic and allowing the papers to be read and then pulling out the important issues and the thematic issues, I think is something that I'm pleased with. Okay, forward agenda. Any items of the forward agenda that people want to raise?
Just to recognise that we've talked about looking at the BAF, and so obviously bringing that forward. And also, I think there will be a new rhythm of self-assessments for the board, particularly around the capability. So we'll be looking to update the 2026 rolling agenda to reflect that.
Thank you, Sally. Okay, in that case, I'm going to call part one and thank everybody who is online and who is listening in it, and bring part one to an end. So thank you for listening in, if you are listening in either now or in the future. So wondering how I could do that one, and bring that to an end, and then just say